The Greek world was very different from a religious perspective to much of the modern world. A visitor to Athens or Corinth, for instance, in the 5th century BCE, at the height of Greek classical culture, would have wandered past temples to different gods and goddesses. One of the things which might have struck this intrepid traveller was that some gods and goddesses were universally worshipped in different cities and states, but others were broadly ignored in some regions and yet were zealously worshipped in others. This is very different to the modern world, where most of the dominant religions are monotheistic, meaning that they worship a sole god, notably in Christianity and Islam, the major modern exception being Hinduism. The Greeks were quite different, being polytheists with a pantheon of thousands of gods, goddesses, and demi-gods, while local cults and shrines abounded, which placed emphasis on the worship of certain deities in certain regions. Athens, to take a prominent example, was one of the great centers of the worship of Athena, the Greek goddess of war, reasoning, and crafts. They even named their city after her. Accordingly, Greek religion was much more complex than many other modern religions. It all started with Uranus, Gaia, and the Titans. Uranus, Gaia, and the Titans. According to the theogony of the ancient Greek poet Hesiod, who was writing around the 8th century BCE, the world had first come into existence as two primordial parents. These were Uranus and Gaia, with Uranus forming the sky and Gaia forming the earth. These two celestial entities then begot 12 children who are known as the Titans. 6 of these were male and 6 were female. The male Titans were Cronus, Oceanus, Cous, Creus, Hyperion, and Iapetus, while the 6 female Titans were Rhea, Theia, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys. These were the first generation of gods and goddesses who would rule the universe, and from them were descended the subsequent generations of celestial beings, who in turn created further generations, until there were thousands of gods and goddesses populating the world in the ancient past. In order to do this, the male Titans generally mated with the female Titans, a necessary act of inbreeding given that they were the only 12 deities around at the time. From amongst these, the most powerful was Cronus, who eventually became the king of the Titans, effectively ruling over the cosmos, which had been created by Uranus and Gaia. It was the children produced from his union with his sister Rhea, which begot the most significant cluster of all the Greek gods and goddesses. These were known as the Olympians. The Olympians, like the Titans before them, the Olympians were a set of 12 gods and goddesses, they being Zeus, Poseidon, Hermes, Athena, Hera, Artemis, Apollo, Ares, Hephaestus, Demeter, Aphrodite, and either Hestia or Dionysius. There is some point of debate as to whether Dionysius or Hestia constituted the 12th of the Olympians. These 12 went to live on Mount Olympus in northern Greece after they were begotten by Cronus and Rhea. By way of contrast, the Titans lived on Mount Othrys not far away. There they lived in peace for some time, that is until Cronus elected to overthrow his father Uranus with the aid of Uranus's wife Gaia and claim control over the cosmos. This led some of the Olympians, chief amongst them Zeus and Poseidon, to begin plotting the overthrow of their own father in turn. Their efforts to do so resulted in a cosmic war typically known as the Titanomachy, or War of the Titans. It is from this that the modern phrase, the Clash of the Titans, originates. Our accounts of these events are generally drawn from Hesiod's Theogony, a poem concerning Greek religion and the foundation of the cosmos, though many other versions of these stories were available to the ancient Greeks, which have now sadly been lost as copies were not produced down to modern times. What each of these versions of the origins of the universe would have included were details of the 10 years of war which followed between Cronus and the other Titans and the Olympians. In the course of this, Zeus and his brothers and sisters employed a wide array of monstrous creatures such as the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants, to battle the Titans. However, the Titans were able to call on some of their other offspring such as Atlas, the son of Iapetus, to aid them. Eventually, the Olympians triumphed, and the Titans were condemned to Tartarus, a deep abyss in the earth where the condemned are sent for eternity, not unlike the Christian conception of hell. Other of their allies were punished in different ways. Atlas, for instance, was condemned by Zeus to have to hold up the world for eternity, a tale which lies behind why we call a map of the world an atlas today. Zeus, king of the gods. Having triumphed over the Titans, the Olympians established themselves as the rulers of creation. Zeus, who had led the revolt against his father Cronus, became the king of the gods and master of everything on land. His brother Poseidon became the ruler of the seas, and the other Titans became patrons and masters of other aspects of life. For instance, Aphrodite was considered to be the goddess of love, Ares was the god of war, and Demeter became the goddess of harvest and agriculture. In these roles, the Olympians would become the most revered and worshipped of all the gods and goddesses in the ancient Greek world, many of them having prominent temples in the leading cities and towns of the Greek Mediterranean. Mount Olympus was seen as a revered place where Zeus ruled over the universe from, but it should be understood that these were not benign deities. They could be crude, spiteful, and vengeful, much like the God of the Old Testament in Christianity and Judaism. Zeus was often the worst culprit, seen in many stories as needlessly punishing those who he felt had slighted him or disobeyed his commands. For instance, when the Greek god of fire, Prometheus, stole the secret of fire from the Olympians and divulged information about how to make fire and its benefits to human beings, Zeus condemned him to an eternity of being tied to a rock with an eagle devouring his liver every day, the organ then growing back overnight and being consumed once again the following day in a vicious form of a divine Groundhog Day. The king of the gods was also known to regularly shapeshift into a different form and go around raping individuals or other celestial beings, the demi-gods and local cults. The Olympians were far from the only gods and goddesses who were worshipped throughout the Greek world. There were hundreds of other gods and goddesses, many of whom were begotten by the Olympians or by some combination of the offspring of the various Titans who had survived the purge which occurred at the end of the War of the Titans. This resulted in a complex family tree of deities. Many of these, in turn, went on to mate with humans, resulting in the emergence of a new form of celestial being, the demi-gods, half-human, half-divine individuals. One such demigod, who is well known today, was Heracles or Hercules, the son of a union between Zeus and Alcmene. The demigods stand as a bridge between the mystical elements of Greek creation stories as found in Hesiod's Theogony and the gradual drift towards semi-mythical history, with some ancient Greek kings believed to have been demigods as well. This further represents the drift from Greek religion to Greek mythology, a subject which will be explored in the subsequent video in this series. These many gods, goddesses, and demigods had particular relevance for different Greek communities, either on the Greek mainland or the islands and cities across the Mediterranean. These were called local cults and often sprung up where a divine being was said to have played some prominent role in the emergence of the state there. For instance, Heracles was worshipped in a great fashion in the city of Thebes, where legend had it he was born. Athena was the focus of a major local cult in Athens. An important local cult to the worship of Apollo was found at Hylotes, on the island of Cyprus, between the 3rd century BCE and the 3rd century CE, and so on and so forth across the Greek world. Religious practice amongst the Greeks. So how did the Greeks actually worship their many gods and goddesses? This was multifaceted, much like modern-day religions. For instance, the Greeks held certain texts such as Hesiod's Theogony or the works of the semi-mythical Orpheus to be sacred religious texts, though ones which were also understood to have a poetical and cultural value. This is not entirely dissimilar to the Christian reverence for certain prayers or the Psalms. There was no overarching structure to Greek religion or a Greek church to speak of. Rather, individual temples looked after their own affairs. However, a number of temples were held in special regard across the Greek world, notably the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, the priestesses of which were known as seers with the power of clairvoyance, who were regularly consulted on a range of matters by governments of city-states from across the Greek world. The Temple of Zeus at Olympia was also extremely important, and it was here that the Olympian Games were held in ancient times. Within these temples, individuals would have made offerings of wine and food to various deities. Domestic animals were often sacrificed on altars within temple sanctums, and the reading of the entrails was a common act of divining good or bad omens. Incense was also burnt on fires in the ancient Greek equivalent of the Christian practice of lighting candles to say a prayer. These forms of worship extended to the home, where people often had a small shrine where they poured libations and offered a prayer. Often the favored god or goddess of an individual or family might reflect their profession or family business. A fisherman, for instance, might favor worshipping Poseidon, the god of the sea, while a seamstress might be inclined to offer prayers to Athena, a goddess of handicraft. As such, Greek religious practice and worship were complex and often region and individual specific. Greek religion, other pagan faiths, and the advent of Christianity. Greek religion remained strong across the Eastern Mediterranean, well beyond the point at which Greek political culture was reduced and the area became part of the Roman Empire. The Romans had no need to try to convert the Greeks to their religion, for the simple fact that Roman religion was effectively a carbon copy of the Greek theological system. It contained all of the same figures and stories. The names of the gods and goddesses were simply different. For instance, the king of the gods in the Roman pantheon was Jupiter, the exact equivalent of Zeus. Ares, the Greek god of war, became Mars in the Roman system. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was Venus to the Romans. Sometimes these distinctions were paper-thin. Heracles, for example, simply became Hercules in the Roman belief system. There were also some slight variations on local cults and the nature of the more obscure gods and goddesses, but a Roman visiting Athens in the 2nd century CE would have found the religions he or she found there to be very familiar to what was practiced back home. Moreover, this cultural osmosis involved Christianity as well to some extent. The Jewish perception of a vengeful, all-powerful God, as found in the Old Testament, was not very far away from the position of Zeus and Jupiter in the Greek and Roman pantheons. But ultimately, Christianity had little time for a polytheistic pantheon of many gods and goddesses. Hence, when Christianity began to gain traction across the Roman Empire in the 4th century CE, the pagans, as the adherents of the old religions were known, experienced increasing persecution. By the late 5th century, they were all but gone from many parts of the Mediterranean, though in creating a new system of local cults and patrons of different aspects of life, known as the cult of the saints, the early Christian authorities did incorporate some elements of the ancient Greek religion into their belief system. This is why Athena, the Greek goddess of love, could in many ways be seen to have been a pagan forerunner of St. Valentine, the Christian saint of love. Consequently, the Christian medieval world remained more indebted to the Greek religion of the past than many would have been aware of at the time.